I think if you're a fairly reflective person and you can go back and you can review your stuff, I personally found that there would be the occasional epiphany where you would, every couple of years, you just feel that something had shifted in your photography and you felt it. And the benefit I had was I'd get people writing to me about it too, and they'd say, there's something changed in what you're doing. In general, I'm not really big on other people's opinions because there's a lot of them. And so I think you have to be selective about what you listen to.
Well, hey everyone. Welcome to episode 387 of F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen with your host, Matt Payne. This week on the podcast, I sat down and had a great conversation with the legendary landscape photographer, Bruce Percy. I personally found this conversation very enriching and enlightening, so I think you will all really enjoy it. Please stay tuned to the very end to take advantage of some very nice discounts and special offers available only to listeners of the podcast. Cheers. Okay, let's get to this week's conversation with Bruce Percy. All right, Bruce Percy, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks very much, Matt. Thanks for inviting me. I think it's the third time.
Yeah, shout out to a mutual friend, Norm McCloskey, who helped kind of make this connection finally work out. And so here we are, finally recording.
Mm-hmm.
Bruce, for the 7 people who live underneath a rock that have never heard of Bruce Percy, I would love for you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I live in Scotland. I couldn't really tell you where I'm from. I kind of live in the town of Edinburgh when I'm here. I spend quite a bit of time every year away somewhere, run lots of workshops and tours and things. And I kind of went full time at this not that long ago, although it's now starting to feel like that. 2009 was the first time I went kind of full time, making a living from running trips and workshops. But I'd had a website together since about 2001, which I think was one of the advantages I had at the time, because when I started off as an amateur, whatever you want to call me, I don't really like using the word amateur, probably more enthusiast than anything. There were 3 websites. From what I remember, there was Michael Reichman's Luminous Landscape, there was Fred Miranda, and Ken Rockwell. And I remember I worked in an IT office. I put my first website together with 3 images on it. And it just grew from there. And this is pre-social media. This is pre-Facebook and everything. And for about 6-7 years, I would notice that there was lots of blogs talking about me and things like that. I used to get the odd cold contact from places like National Geographic and things like that. I mean, that stuff doesn't happen now at all, of course. But it was a very different age at the time, and I'd been thinking about a way of trying to get out of IT, trying to get out of the 9-to-5 job. Couldn't see myself being in there in my 40s and 50s. I'm currently 56 now, and I think the credit crash happened for me. That was the real thing that pushed me out. I think I was too chicken to really go ahead and change my career. And my bit of advice for that is there's never a perfect time. And I think the perfect time probably is if you don't have another job, you've got nothing to fall back on, then you've got all the free time to work on your new job. But I wouldn't advise giving up the job just to try and change something. I think these things tend to be catalysts more than anything. And I didn't realize that when I decided that I was going to start running workshops, my website had been building up a bit of momentum for about 8 years. There had been enough people that knew about me, and I didn't even know it, because the website was very different from the one that you see now. It didn't have a store. It didn't have a workshop list. It didn't have anything. It just had a couple of galleries. And all that I would, I think all I remember just saying is I put it on the front page saying I'm running a trip to Patagonia. And I was really surprised to find out that it filled up within about 3 weeks. And I was like, I didn't know there was anybody following me. And so, so that was quite interesting. And so this is all basically pre-social media. So I think the timing was just right. I think I got in there just before the kind of it was a very much a sort of an emerging market at the time, running tours and workshops. And it was also a period in photography where you could actually go somewhere that nobody had been before. In the way that I kind of feel now that sometimes when I look at the workshops that I offer, it would be very forgivable for a lot of people to look at them and go, oh, he's doing the same thing that everybody else does. But sometimes I was there, not necessarily the first, but sometimes I was maybe early getting into a place before it had really taken off. And that's kind of changed now. But I would definitely still say that I think the majority of the world has not been photographed. And I think the problem for a lot of workshop and tour leaders now is that it's a double-edged sword. First of all, trying to find the time to find new places, because there are lots of amazing places that people just don't go to. And the other downside of it as well is that sometimes it's about trying to convince your audience that it's worth going, particularly somewhere new, because established places, Patagonia, you just tell people Patagonia and everybody wants to go. So you've kind of got that thing. For the first 10 years of the business, I found that every year I was finding something new, and it would tend to happen in a very organic way. My personal belief is that you don't go looking to try and make a business out of this. What you do is you just go to be inspired, and you find the places that you love, and then you think about running a tour or a workshop much later on, once you've gotten to know it and photograph it. So when I started off in my business, a lot of the places I was leaning on and using in my yearly itinerary were places that I'd gone to privately for a very long time. I think Patagonia, Torres del Paine, I'd gone about 8 or 9 times before. Or there's an invitation. You get an invitation from someone that you've met, and I'm very much into this kind of, I'm slightly, Buddhist about the whole thing. Try not to say no. When you get an invitation or a door, doors being opened there, just walk through it and see what happens. And I just found that things just went from strength to strength that way. It was very organic. I think since the whole COVID thing, it's changed things a bit. I think I found that everything's in a state of flux at the moment, and it's trying to get back into a rhythm and a pattern with it, and trying to find your feet again to keep moving forward with new things. That's where I'm currently at the moment. So, sorry, that was a very long introduction.
There's a lot to chew on there, and I totally agree with you about things being in flux. And I think the balance in creating workshops is trying to figure out a way to offer something that has the right mixture of logistics that makes sense, and also like targeting the right audience who can actually afford to go, and then like figuring out how do you make the right balance of physical strenuous activities that might be required in any given location and things like that. So it's
there's a lot of planning, a lot of logistics about things like that. You can get really amazing places, but maybe they're a bit more off the beaten track. And I think it's very difficult with people's fitness, because I think the only people that are really in touch with what their true level of ability of fitness is are fitness freaks. Anybody that's a regular hiker, a regular outdoors person, probably knows what their limits are. But I would say that most people probably think if it's been advertised, it must be okay. So that's a difficult one, because sometimes you want to go somewhere that that I would personally, if I have to, I will sleep under a sheet of tarpaulin for the night if I think there's a great photograph at the end of it. I'll put myself through. Right. I'll sacrifice anything for a fine, but I know that when I run trips and everything, I can't do that. And everybody's got different parameters or boundaries about what they think's acceptable. My guide and good friend Hawk in Iceland, he often says to me that everybody's a daytime warrior, that they always want a nice meal and a nice glass of wine at the end of the day. And I think that's sadly kind of true in a way, because there's a couple of places that I've tried to offer things where it's maybe a bit more basic, the accommodation's basic, or it's a bit more kind of, you've got a shared accommodation or something like that, but it's worth it if you're going somewhere that nobody's been before. Then I think it's, you can't really put a kind of a mark on that in terms of how valuable that is to you as an experience. So yes, I mean, I think, and I'm not really like this crazy guy that likes to take risks with things. I like to make sure that everybody's comfortable and that things are within the boundaries and stuff like that. But certainly, I mean, I think when I started running my trip in Iceland in the interior, there wasn't an awful lot of people. I think most people, if they ran a trip and taking people into the interior of Iceland, it was usually a mixture of like lots of other highlights around Iceland and one maybe a couple of afternoons or a day or something in the middle of the interior on the way somewhere. And I remember talking to my guide in Iceland about this way back in 2015. We had about a year of debating this about taking people in there. Well, there's nowhere to stay. Well, yes, there is. There's somewhere just on the outskirts. Well, you can't get in for sunrise sunsets. Yes, but it's not really a sunrise sunset location because the deserts are jet black. So all that happens is the sun goes down, everything just gets too dark. and I think that place excels in the middle of the day. So sometimes what you'd find is that even running the trips and workshops yourself, you would learn something yourself about what you can actually work in, because certainly when I started off, I was very much a religious sunrise and sunset only shooter, and I would put the camera in the bag, and now I kind of almost shoot in anything apart from really sunny weather. I just and occasionally I'm forced to do that, and I can still sometimes get something out of that, but that's possibly more delving into the side about how far you can move into editing and post-processing work, whatever. But yeah, so you learn things from certain landscapes. You realise that actually, the centre of Highlands of Iceland, they really excel at middle of the day shooting because the ground is really dark. There's a lot of overcast skies, so you can get a lot of typically quite soft light, so you can actually get in there and you can actually shoot the whole day. And then if you hang around waiting for the sunsets, it just darkens down and you lose definition. So I think over the 15 years, there's been certain places I've gone to where you find out that it's just taught you something. And I'm very big on this idea that landscapes are teachers. And what one landscape gives you, you tend to find it feeds into. In fact, I've just been writing a script at the moment. I've been writing some text, and I've been saying that my personal view is that for me, I never consider myself a minimalist. Lots of people talk about, he's a minimalist about his work. And it was just a process of reduction that I went to Bolivia, and I remember my first images there thinking they're very simple and they're very empty, comparatively speaking to the stuff I'd been doing before. And now when I look at them, I think, God, they're so busy and they're a bit clumsy, and they're really clumsy. But Bolivia taught me a lot. And then I personally think that I wouldn't have been able to go to the interior of Iceland without having spent my kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Apprentice kind of time in Bolivia. I think Bolivia taught me a lot about simplifying landscapes, and similarly, even coming back to photograph the Isle of Harris in Scotland, once I'd been working on these massive salt plains and these very vast empty deserts in Bolivia, when I went back to the Highlands of Scotland, I could actually see similarities, and I think that's a strange comparison to make, but out the blue, you find that this landscape's taught you something that you can bring forward in your photography. So I'm very much of the opinion that when you meet the right landscape at the right time, it usually will give you something. And if you find that you're getting on really well with a landscape, you should just keep going back because it's teaching you something. I think you're growing with it. And I think that's just down to how you are, though. I have a general theory that people tend to be one of two breeds of type of photographer. You've either got the person that just wants to take a vacation every year and go somewhere new and photograph somewhere new, which is great. And then you've also got the one that's looking much more into sort of the personal development and wants to get a bit deeper into landscape and grow with it. And I think that's when you start to find certain landscapes or places that you have to keep returning to, which is pretty much what I've been doing for quite some time now with some of the places.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's a perfect segue, because one of the main things that I wanted to talk to you about today was personal development. And obviously you've been at this craft of landscape photography for a long time now, 20 plus years. And I mean, you kind of said it yourself. I mean, your style is really recognized and coalesced around kind of these ideas of minimalism, and what I personally see as a strong predilection towards certain shapes in the landscape, especially triangles and circles and whatnot. How did you kind of develop what has come to be known the Bruce Percy style?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I thought that was very interesting. We read your comments yesterday. I didn't really. I don't feel that way. I don't feel that it's very difficult to get a handle on how you're perceived or what people
Right.
think of you or anything. All I know really is I'm a little bit of an introvert, to be honest, a bit of a hermit. I don't really spend a lot of time digging around or making connections with people. I just get on with doing what I'm doing. And I think when I turned this into a full-time occupation, I think of this now as a sort of calling, if you like. It's most of my time spent on it. So usually when I've got any free time, I don't really spend much time now looking at other people's work. So that's a sort of sideline about this. But just to go back to the question, well, all I can tell you is I've been writing about it for a long time, and I've pretty much come to the conclusion I don't think you can manufacture a style, and I don't think that everybody actually finds one. And I talk about that, I would like to personally believe, with great experience of being a failed musician, because I've been writing music since I was 12, and I never ever thought that I ever found a voice with my music writing. And it was something that I thought that if anybody could ask me, how would you define yourself? I would have said that I was a songwriter. And around about 34 years of age, I packed it in because I just felt like I was going nowhere with it. So first of all, I think that I don't really think that everybody can find a voice. And I think if you do, I think it tends to surface very gradually. I would think that one of the things that probably helped me a bit was when you're running workshops all the time, you have to think about things and you have to try and explain them to people. And I'm pretty much convinced that if I'd stayed in IT, I don't know if my photography would have moved on as much as it has. And it's not because I'm shooting a lot, because I actually don't shoot a lot. I'm not that prolific, but in terms of spending your time thinking about it and what's going on, I certainly have had to apply that. And there's one of my favourite musicians, Brian Eno. He's a bit of a philosopher, if you know of him. He's basically produced some fairly big acts like U2, and he sounds to me like he's more like a scientist or somebody, an ideas man that they get in when they're particularly stuck. And it's very fascinating listening to him talk, because he said this thing that I've never forgotten. He said that sometimes in the process of trying to explain something to somebody, you find yourself saying something that you didn't know that you knew. And I've had that many a time where halfway through explaining something, it's like the little light bulb goes off and you go, ah, and it's such a fascinating thing. So I think that if style and things like that, I think they tend to evolve. I think they tend to be down to maybe you having to review your work would be really helpful. I think an awful lot of people come home, I'm making broad assumptions here, of course, make their images, edit them, stick them up on a website or something, or stick them on a hard drive and don't go any further. But I think if you're a fairly reflective person and you can go back and you can review your stuff, I personally found that there would be the occasional epiphany where you would, every couple of years, you just feel that something had shifted in your photography and you felt it. And the benefit I had was I'd get people writing to me about it too, and they'd say, there's something changed in what you're doing. In general, I'm not really big on other people's opinions because there's a lot of them. And so I think you have to be selective about what you listen to. And certainly when you get somebody saying something to you that you've considered yourself, you've wondered, I think there's a shift here, and then somebody else tells you that, I think that's confirmation. And so that's the kind of advice I think people should really listen to. When something seems to resonate with what you were already thinking, then that's really valuable, because it's just confirmation that you're on the right track. But I never tried to make anything particularly simple or minimal. I even had a discussion with Michael Kenna about this about 3-4 years ago. He's got this book called The Rouge, and it's about a plant in, I think it's in Michigan or something, and he'd done a second version of the book, and the book had some additional images in it that were shot at that time. So he hadn't gone back recently to do new work, and he just found some other negatives he hadn't printed, and he put them in. And I thought it was interesting because the images in there, they were pre his Hokkaido work. and yet they looked like his Hokkaido compositions. And I just said, sometimes when you look back at your older work, you see traces of who you were or who you are now in your earlier work, but it's not so difficult to see it going forward. It's kind of like so you discover that these things were already there. So for me, I think that maybe the attention to composition, attention to shapes and graphic lines and things, I think they were always there. But there was probably a lot of other noise in there too, with a lot of the compositions I was doing very early on. So yeah, I think that's all I can say about it. Is it's a process of evolution, and I think certainly self-awareness, collecting your work together into portfolios, very powerful to do, and even putting work together that you don't even think matches. I wonder sometimes how many people have actually gotten all their work together and decided, well, I'm going to put it all together in a big folder and I'm going to dig out all my favourite shots from that and then have a look at them, because that will tell you on your best days, this is as great as you can be. And I would guarantee or wager anyway, a bet that you will see repeating themes and stylistic things in there, and that's you. And so normally when people tell me I don't know if I've got a style, usually I'm sort of wondering, have they inquired with themselves? Have they actually checked in on what they've been doing and done a review on their own work?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's funny when I look back at some of my early photography, like 2011 through 2016. I was so obsessed with just getting good light, like, awesome clouds and amazing sunrises and awesome sunsets. And of course, I'm sure I was drawn to shapes and patterns and lines and things like that too, but it wasn't something that I was consciously aware of as much, probably. And then now when I look at my work, really awesome light is kind of secondary. Like it's kind of like accentuating the main story of what I'm trying to convey in terms of shapes and lines and a story behind the photograph. So I feel like that intentionality of looking back at our old work and then thinking about what it is we're actually wanting to capture, I think is an important process to go through.
Well, can I just pick you up on something there? You said that the light is not so important now, where you were more fascinated or obsessed by the light at the beginning. So I have a kind of slightly leading question about that. Is that basically because you now find that maybe your editing skills, you know there's like you can push things if you need to, that you can maybe arrive at something without just trying to maybe get everything to be just so when you're there?
Yeah,
Is that a leading question? Maybe I've put words in your mouth there, but
No, you're good. I think for me personally, editing is not something that, I'm decent at it, but I would say like I actually typically avoid photographs that require a ton of editing. Like I prefer my photographs to stand on their own in terms of the composition and the subject, and then light kind of be the secondary kind of
so
lead.
basically, you're what you're looking for has changed. Then you're not so obsessed by the light qualities.
Yeah, there was probably 6 or 7 years where I wouldn't even get out my camera if there wasn't clouds in the sky. You know what I mean? So, just kind of ridiculous in hindsight. But now it's like, now I can just get out a telephoto lens and I can look for interesting shapes and patterns and metaphors and things like that. So it's just an evolution, I guess I would say.
Yeah, well, a friend of mine said to me at one point, the camera points both ways, and I think there's a lot of psychology in photography, and part of what I'm picking up here is a degree of confidence. And also maybe slightly letting go a bit more about things, perhaps. I don't know.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, and I think confidence is a very interesting subject, because I remember I had an art student on one of my trips years ago, and she was giving me a hard time. Oh, you've done something to this picture. You've done this, done that, and I have a personal opinion. It's just my own kind of version of what I think photography is about. I think photography is not real. It's an illusion, in my view. I think it's an interpretive thing. It's a 2D representation of reality and stuff like that. So that's where I'm coming from in it. But that's just me. And with her, she was definitely of the opinion that when you photograph something, it's, you're photographing reality and stuff like that. But halfway through the conversation with her, at one point she said, it's very easy for you to say this. And I was like, oh, what do you mean by that? And then she said, well, you've obviously got a lot of confidence in what you're doing. And, I never thought of myself as a confident person. But I've had quite a long time to think about what she said. And it's something, as the years have gone by, I actually think it's a really important thing to have confidence in what you're doing because, and I'm not talking about me personally, I'm talking about for everybody's own personal development. I think at some point you have to trust yourself more. You have to commit so that when you're making decisions out in the landscape and you're deciding what to do, you've got to do you know that expression, make your bed and lie in it?
Oh, yeah.
Do you have the same expression in America? So, that idea of like you've made a commitment, you just make the decision. And this idea of having an undo button is kind of, you should get rid of that notion. But also, I think some of us, particularly when we're learning, at the very beginning, I think everybody needs an audience. But I think the problem that we all do is that we maybe hold too much weight on everything that everybody tells us. And I think the first thing that we probably have to do is we have to learn to be more discerning about what we're going to take on board. And so rather than just going, if somebody says something to you that you think is fairly unconstructive and just being upset about it, is just being able to think, well, that's an opinion, but it might be true. It might be something that is something that I'll come round to later on, so that there might be something in there, but it's just not for you at the moment. So trying to be a bit open-minded about it, being able to let things go, and also just at some point not to overly obsess or worry too much about what everybody's thinking about you, because personally, from my point of view, if I worried about everything that anybody told me about my work, I would be all over the place with it, because I've heard so many things for 15 years now, some very lovely things and some crazy things and strange things and wild things. And then sometimes somebody says something to you that you think, oh God, I didn't even really think of it that way. And now I think they're right. But having the confidence to sort of trust what you think you're doing, and actually even to understand that even if you got it wrong, that's okay. But you've at some point, you've got to start believing in yourself more about what you're doing and where you're going with your art. And I think that's very difficult, particularly at the beginning. I think we tend to sort of hold on very much to what other people are thinking about what we're doing, and possibly hold too much value in it as well.
Well, and putting too much value in what other people are doing, right? Because I can remember when I first started landscape photography, I had this notion that the only good photographs to be had were these epic grand landscapes with incredible light and jagged peaks and crazy stuff in the foreground. And so like I had given myself tunnel vision and a high degree of confidence of what I thought was a good photograph.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing so, I'd kind of pigeonholed myself and put blinders on that made it hard for me to see other possibilities within the landscape outside of those kind of very specific conditions. And so I think confidence is a double-edged sword in that way.
It is, yeah, it is. I mean, I think that's touching on something else, is that I think when you start, if you had a really good handle on your abilities right at the beginning, most of us would give up. So there's a thing out there it's called the Dunning-Krueger effect, and it's basically I don't know if you've seen this graph, but it just basically shows that everybody tends to think they're much better at what they are doing at the very beginning. Particularly, you tend to overcompensate. You tend to think you're much better. And that old thing that people tend to say: "If I knew then what I know now."
Right.
It's that thing, so it's exactly that thing. So like you start off and the way you're describing what you think you knew what you were doing, and that's a tricky one, because when you go into somewhere, if you don't know the depth of how far you can go with this, then it's very easy on the surface to think you're mostly there, you've picked it up. And then the Dunning-Kruger effect says as you continue, you get to this point where you become you get more objective and more realistic about your abilities. And then that's usually when people get into the depths of despair about it, because they start to, because they've got this kind of really accurate, oh God, I really do suck at this. And you've got to go through that period. And I think you keep going through those periods where you plateau. I don't think progress is linear. And you have periods where you stagnate. And I think you've also got to give yourself a break during those periods and be kind to yourself and say, look, I think that actually when you stagnate anyway, all that's happened now is that some part of you has decided that what you've been doing, although you thought it was really good and it was good for a while, it's not good enough anymore. And I think that's just you telling yourself that you're ready to move on. I think that's what's going on there. So that it can be a double-edged sword, the confidence thing. Yes, absolutely. And I'm really coming at it from the point of view that I think, in general, I think the most common thing I think is people just hold too much weight on what other people think of what they're doing. And I think the best option at some point is just to get to the understanding that you're really doing it for yourself. The pictures are really, they really should be. I seem to be a bit of a schizophrenic chameleon with this because somehow I seem to have separated both of them. I don't know why, but I don't seem to care very much about whether anybody likes my pictures or not. And that's not to say that everybody does, because sometimes when I put like a newsletter out advertising, I'm going to do a special offer on some prints or something. Usually the prints that sell a lot are usually my personal least favorite ones.
Isn't that the worst?
yeah. And I think it's because I think I'm much more into these much more kind of austere, kind of very bordering on graphic art now. I don't think my style's that revolutionary or whatever, but it's just I think that's where my aesthetics are going. And so I keep thinking that other people, if they're following me, that's what they like. But I still think that an awful lot of people like what I would consider fairly kind of conservative, traditional landscapes, with nice light in them and everything. So it's kind of so like if I can't gauge what my audience is going to like, you're best just getting on doing what you want to do. And there's a fantastic quote I heard once. It was something like, instead of doing a job that you don't want to do, why don't you try failing at a job that you do want to do? And it's the same idea. It's like, well, if nobody's going to like your work anyway, or you don't know whether they're going to like your work, you may as well do what you want to do rather than trying to do the things that you think other people might like. I don't really know how many people actually do that, though. I just find on my workshops that I tend to find that I think most people know what they like. They usually get excited by certain things and they say, I really love this,
Yeah, and I think there's a painful danger in having the knowledge of what your audience likes, because oftentimes, at least for me, it's not necessarily the kind of stuff that I'm super into anymore, like you were describing. And so if I see a scene that I'm like not that drawn to, but I know that my audience will like it, then it's like, okay, I guess I should photograph that, but it's also not as rewarding personally. So that's a challenge as well.
It's just, I've just never done it. And the weird thing about it is that I think my style of photography changed a lot. When I first got into this, I was a huge Galen Rowell fan. And if you've seen the pictures that I was shooting about 15 years ago, there were lots of contrasts, lots of strong colour. And I don't do any of that now. And I never intended to go this very muted. I get some participants now just tell me that I've got no colour in my pictures. I just tell them that they need to go and see an optician because their colour awareness is bad. But joking aside, it evolved and it changed, but it happened gradually. And I have a theory that if you have an audience, and if you want to have an audience, then there's a really valuable thing to know about having an audience is that they're always one step behind you. They're never up to speed with where you are. Because if you are changing, you're going to do things that your audience don't like. And I remember in one of my workshops, there was a group, they were all looking over somebody's iPad and it was all this really highly colourful, high contrast work. And one of my clients said, yeah, this stuff sells. But I was looking at them and I was thinking, yeah, but you're all in this workshop and you've all come with me and I've got really muted colour in my pictures now. They're kind of more or less, I would say they're kind of traditional black and white printing techniques with a bit of colour in there. And you're here. So why are you here? And it turns out because they like what I'm doing anyway. So you don't you don't need to have world domination for this. You just need to find a group of people that resonate with what you're doing if you need an audience. And I think that if your style does change, you might lose people, but you'll gain people, because you'll just get people that'll sort of find you and say, I like what he's doing. And so in that instance, I think you're best to do the things that you like doing, because then you've got the audience of the people that they're in sync with you. It's one of the things that I like in my workshops. My guide in Iceland says to me, it's incredible, Bruce, because he runs his own photo trips, and he said everybody in my trips, they all want to photograph the horses, they want to do the aurora, they want to do all the waterfalls, and yet when your groups, they all just want to do the minimal black deserts that you like. And I said, well, that's hopefully why they're here, because I think if you've hopefully got a strong enough kind of identity in your photographs, then if you've got participants coming on your tours or workshops, they're coming because they resonate with that. They see something in it that appeals to them. And so you're not going to just take them on a sort of, you're not going to sort of spend all week doing waterfalls with them if you don't show them that on your website. So style from that point of view can be really helpful, because it can send a very clear message to people about who or what you are. And all I can suggest is it's all about trying to be as authentic as you can with your stuff. If you're really photographing the things that you like and that you do, then you'll get that audience. It'll just come really in its own way. But that's if you're running a business. I personally think these days that I sometimes think that if I wasn't running a business now, I'm not even too sure that I would actually publish anything. I think I have a theory that photography is really a very personal thing. It's a very private endeavor to a degree. And in some respects, it would just be kind of nice just to go out there and just photograph things. And, there's no sort of like, from my point of view, I've obviously got this commercial side of it where I've got to think about every year that, well, if I'm going to run a new trip to Iceland, it's really nice if I've got some new images from Iceland to shoot. That kind of thing. That's probably one of the pressures that I do have.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think there's a twist that I wanted to ask you about when it comes to personal development, especially with someone that has a recognizable kind of aesthetic such as yours. Because I've noticed over the years, there's kind of been a lot of what I would call kind of Bruce Percy copycats emerging. And I'm sure that it's flattering to some degree, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on copycats and personal development, and maybe advice for people who are kind of on that path.
Okay, well, I've had a long time to think about that. I'm not really aware of there being folk out there going off and copying me. Like I said, I don't spend much time on. I only just recently joined Instagram again after I personally don't like social media platforms. I try and stay off them. I left Facebook about 8 years ago, and I personally never missed it. And I just found the whole thing rather unpleasant. I didn't enjoy it. And again, I think that comes back to this idea that I'm just doing it's a private thing, but weirdly enough, I've got a business, and I just didn't need to go anywhere near these platforms to promote things. Well, here's my view on this. I think that everybody starts off by following the footsteps of the people they admire, or the artist they admire, or the work, and you have to start somewhere. And I think it's a very natural thing to do this. It's very, very beneficial to go, for example, if you really like the view of Bridal Veil Fall from Tunnel View from Ansel Adams, then going there to see where he took it and try and do your own version of it. You learn heaps from that. And I used to be slightly, wasn't so keen on trying to promote that when I ran workshops, particularly workshops where they're sort of teaching, mentoring things. I like to sort of distinguish between the two. I run tours and I run workshops, and the workshops where I'm trying to give people some feedback every day and review their work and stuff. And for years you would go somewhere and somebody would say, that you've got this photograph of this place, could you take us there and show us this? And I used to say, I wasn't very keen on it, but I've changed my view on that many years ago. And I think it's actually very beneficial to go there, because sometimes people kind of get surprised and think, wow, I thought that foreground beach was just huge. And I've got here and it's only like about 2 meters wide. And I thought, I now realize I've got to it's a wide angle shot. I thought it was a standard view, when I was there, and I didn't know there was a gift shop at the side, outside of the frame, and all that. So I think that's all beneficial, and I think that everybody copies. Even Pablo Picasso said, what was it? Good artists borrow and great artists steal, and everybody's influenced and fed by everybody else. But in terms of personal development, I would say that certainly, like I remember when I was at high school, every year when you got the new kids coming to high school, and they found out that they could actually basically rent out the guitars and drums after school for an hour. Every year without fail, you would hear these young kids next door, and the first song they'd learn to play would be something like House of the Rising Sun. And I thought, well, it's a standard. It's so easy to learn the guitar riff for that I think that, like, if you want to become a songwriter, you learn to play other people's songs, because you'll just find out how easy or simple they were, how simply constructed they were. So by going along and doing that, I think that's fine. And the only thing I would say about it is it's just at some point you would like to think that it's a starting point, and at some point your path is going to diverge off kind of just kind of following in the footsteps too much, perhaps, of other people. But I think that's normal. I think that you've seen something in their work that resonate with you, it probably fits your aesthetic in some way, so you've got to go and try it. And the last thought I've got about this, Matt, as well, is I also personally think, even though I don't really like it very much, is that the moment that you publish anything that maybe somebody's never seen before or done before, it is now public. It's public ownership. It's out there. And I like to use the analogy of the Apple iPhone. I remember looking at all the kind of websites saying about what they thought the phone was going to look like before it got released. And when it finally got released, I never saw it coming, this black screen with no keyboard on it. And every website, it was trying to figure out where the keyboard would be and hide it. And within a year, everybody's going, well, it's really obvious what you do with a phone. And I'm saying, yeah, but at one point it wasn't obvious. And that's what tends to happen. If you get somebody going out there and they're able to photograph something in a way that we've never seen it before, it's very quickly devalued. It goes from being like, that's amazing, to within a year, everybody's kind of thinking, well, that's kind of what you do when you go there. And so I think this is the problem with it, is as soon as you publish anything, it's public ownership now, and you don't really own the concept anymore. And it just tends to, if people want to copy it, it's going to go that way. But I think for a lot of people, there's just a lot of enjoyment of going somewhere and actually trying their version of the same composition. I think, there's...
Yeah. I agree with that. I was just going to say, one thing I would add, the reason why I've been able to recognize these copycat images is I'm one of the co-founders for the Natural Landscape Photography Awards. And so every year we get thousands and thousands of images submitted. Mm-hmm. And invariably, there's always people who submit work that's very, very, very similar to other people like yours. And I mean, literally the exact same composition. And it's even like one of those scenes where it's been edited a very certain way in order to reveal that aesthetic. And so they went like out of their way to not only capture the exact same composition, but then edit it in exactly the same style that the previous person did. And so...
Well, that's an interesting one. I would actually even say that I genuinely believe that for a lot of those kind of situations, I don't even think that they even consider I would say that's maybe a little bit of intellectual property infringement, but I don't think they view it that way at all. And I think sometimes people even think, well, that's what you would do if you go there. And it's down to this idea that, like, say maybe you've got a mountain in the background that I've deliberately made it jet black so it stands out as a triangle shape, because that's one of the things I love doing.
Right.
I've seen this where you might get a couple of participants that they edit it the same way, and yet if you said to them, that's not necessarily like how you have to do it. It's just an option. Right. And it's the way that I did it. I just don't think they've just thought it through. They just haven't. And I think you've got to give everybody the break on that they're just enthusiasts. Similarly, it's like with some people that enter, most people don't even, they're just half the time they're just pleased they've got something that they like, that they've, so I don't really think there's a lot of thought going in there too much sometimes. And I don't think it's really done with any kind of deliberate idea of trying to steal somebody's idea or anything.
No, I don't think that's the intent, and that's not necessarily what I was trying to.
No, I don't think you were saying that either, but I totally get what you're saying, because I see it sometimes myself on trips and things where they've mirrored what I do. And I think you learn a lot from mirroring. But I suppose what that leads me to is, I think these days, back in the 80s, you were really lucky if you could actually just get like a really nicely exposed frame.
Right.
And then you were really extra lucky on top of that if it was a nicely exposed frame and it was a great composition. If you got both those things in the same frame, you were doing really well. Well, I think we've gone beyond that now. I think that you can go into Instagram, and the level of competence out there is very high now. So what I think now is the new bar for me is that it's about individuality.
Yes,
it's about promoting people to think about. Yes, it's nice to go and do your version of Ansel Adams' tunnel view shot, or it's nice to go to Lago Peoe and do. Because I did that. I went to Lago Peoe in Patagonia because Galen Rowell had been there. I just wanted to see it because I loved his photographs so much, and I took shots there. And I took shots there too. So we all do it, and anybody that says they have never done it, they're lying. So I think that it's all about understanding that maybe what you've done is you've taken somebody else's concept, you've learned from it, but it's not really an original idea from you. And certainly trying to promote people to think more about, well, rather than sort of going to all the places that everybody else wants to go to, maybe being deliberately more individual about what you're trying to do is something I think that needs to be encouraged a bit more. And I don't know how you do it, because it's a double-edged sword with even the kind of business that I got, because if I publish pictures for a tour that I'm doing, I would say that most people are looking at the pictures and hopefully they're thinking, I love those pictures, I'd love to go and photograph that place too.
Right.
And so it seems to be at odds with this idea that you're promoting people to be more individualistic and try and find their own thing. And if you didn't know any better, you would think the world there's about 8 places in the world that you can go and photograph. There's the southwest of America, of course. You've got Iceland, you've got Lofoten in Norway, you've got Patagonia, and you've got Namibia and Antarctica or something, and you would think that's about it. But there's, I'm absolutely convinced there's millions of places, and you could do a fantastic shot round the corner from your house if you got the right light and things like that. So, and again, I suppose that comes down to confidence rather than sort of following the herd, just following your own, where you want to go. What's your gut telling you that you want to do?
And it takes a while to get there, right? And inevitably, whenever this subject comes up, I get accused of like saying that people are doing photography wrong, and that's not what I'm trying to imply at all. I think I have these high hopes that other people will get to experience that kind of aha moment that comes with what you were talking about in terms of putting your individual spin, or like finding yourself in photography and coming to a scene that you've never seen anyone photograph before, interpreting it, making a fantastic image that says something about you, about the scene, and presenting it to the world with pride and experiencing the joy that comes from that process. And I think that's what I would like to see people embrace more, is like trying to aim for that as something that they aspire towards.
Yes, and I think that's a difficult one. I've had time to think about that one too, because I think for some people they're still trying to find out who they are as a photographer. So I think sometimes it's kind of very easy to sort of lean on other things, and also like the pressure. If you've spent a lot of money to go on a tour with somebody, sometimes it's like, and the leader's taking you to a place that he's made some very nice photographs from, you're going to do your versions of those things too. So it's a tricky one.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't quite know what the answer is, because I also think it's a very thorny subject. I usually try and stay away from it because, well, I think it's because you're worried that people are going to think that there's a degree of snobbery, or that you're
Right.
or that you're overly protective about what you do. Because I've pretty much come to the conclusion, as soon as I publish anything that I do, it's up for grabs. Anybody's can go and copy it and whatever, and I think you can't stop it. That's a age-long problem for everyone. And it's how people get inspired, and it's how you get new artists coming along, because new artists tend to sort of merge previous ideas together and merge them into new things. And I don't think everybody's meant to be a revolutionary kind of trying to define new styles all the time. I think an awful lot of people, they're just really happy they've got this as a passion or a hobby to do. And I think the main thing that we always have to remember is to really just be happy in it and enjoy it. But I think this comes down to, I think there's two types in my view. I like to think there's two models of photographer in my view. There's the person that's just really loves taking pictures and would be quite happy to go somewhere famous and take the same iconic shot that everybody else has done, and then go home and frame it and put it on the wall, or whatever. And then you've also got I personally would like to think there's a lot of people out there that are really looking for personal expression, and they're trying to find a way to sort of express what they're seeing and trying to figure out what do they want to convey to people. Some people just know that they just like taking pictures, but they're not sure what to do with it or where to go with it next. And it is a tricky one. I think individuality and promoting some kind of trusting yourself more to try the things that you think. Oftentimes in workshops, I find people ask me roundabout questions. Rather than saying to me, I have to get back to the hotel for a conference meeting at 5 p.m., they'll say to me, what time are we going back to the hotel? Right. And I don't know why they want to go back to the hotel. I'm thinking they're having a rotten day and they just want to go back. And so similarly, usually a lot of the questions I get asked about any personal development come in a very roundabout way, and you've got to try and understand the motivation behind the question. You're trying to figure out what's going on there. And so I think it's sometimes folk they need to try and figure out for themselves about what is it they're trying to do, with their own work. And I would really love to try and promote that a lot more if I could, some form of individuality. And the weird thing about it is I do find that I remember there's one trip I did, there was two ladies turned up. One gave me this very, very confident impression that she was quite experienced. I got this feeling I was dealing with a very experienced photographer. And the other lady was just saying, well, I just started recently and I just don't quite know what I'm doing. And then when I saw the work that week, it was the complete opposite. The lady that said she didn't, I actually thought she did know what she was doing, and she was very tapped into her own intuition. And she just listened to herself more and just ran with what her gut instinct was telling her. And I said to her, that's an amazing skill to have, because there's people out there that don't have that. They're still trying to figure out what they should be doing or where they're going. And I thought she had this natural aptitude for it, but she didn't. She either wasn't prepared to give herself the credit for having that ability, or she was out of step with her own. I think we've all got a sort of a self-image of of how capable we think we are or who we are. And I think sometimes we can be out of sync with ourselves. Maybe we're more capable than we think we are. And so we might be, resting on an out-of-date idea of who or what we are. And, so I often think as workshop leaders, mostly what I'm doing with people is giving them permission.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
That's something that I try to do as well. And a lot of times I found, it's cliche, but I found like the kind of the Socratic method sometimes helps a lot in terms of like,
I don't know what that means. What does that mean? Sorry.
Yeah. Like, asking people questions in response to their questions. So like,
yes,
if they're like, how should I edit this photograph? And oftentimes I find myself asking them, like, instead of answering the question, like, oh, you should make that mountain darker because it adds contrast or whatever, I like to ask them questions like, well, like, what do you want the photograph to do, or what do you want it to say, or what were you drawn to when you captured it,
Yes.
and then
I
use
think
the answers to those questions to guide you in that process.
yeah. So similarly, I think more often for me, I'm the question really isn't the question. It's usually there's a motivation behind the question, and it's been wrapped up in a different way that you're having to try and get round it a little bit to try and figure out what's going on. One of the common questions I get asked a lot is how many successful images do you get on a roll of film? And I stopped doing this now. I tried to turn it around, and I was trying to figure out why they were asking this. And usually they would just say, oh, "I'm just asking," and I'm saying, but they're not just asking. And I think it's coming from a point of view. Maybe I'm putting words in other people's mouths here, but I think there's an assumption that if there's a photographer that you like or you think he's good at what he does, you make an assumption that he's always good at what he does, or he's got a higher high count rate or success rate than you have, and that getting better at photography is more about just being able to sort of click the shutter and come home with a higher success, a higher yield rate. And I'd like to challenge that. I actually think the idea of success and failure should be completely banished from a workshop and should be banished from every creative person's mind. I think that everything should be looked at as a prototype. Everything, even if you get this particular shot that you think this is my pinnacle of everything that I've ever done and I'm so pleased about it, you couldn't have just got there from just getting out of the car and going straight away and just setting it up and doing it bang like that. You'll tend to find if you look at in chronological order, the pictures that happened before it, you had to make those pictures before it to get to that picture. So in my view, everything's like a stepping stone to the next thing. And similarly, if you stop thinking of things as success and failure and you think of them as prototypes, that gives you permission to experiment more. Rather than sort of thinking that if there's a particular the right or wrongs about things, you're now just going out there and you just do as many variations of things that you like to try. So I'm busy recording a workshop at the moment, a sort of online thing I'm going to do. And I'm showing people the transparencies, and I'm pointing out that on a roll of 12 frames, there's usually about 2 to 3 compositions in there, but each one of them has got a variation in the composition. I've actually done it the way I think it looks good. And then I'm starting to think, okay, I saw this when we left the car, I could see that in my mind where I was going to go, and I think I've got it. But sometimes I actually find out that just as I'm bending over to put the camera back in the bag, discover that it's even better from where the camera bag is. And so all I know now is that when I'm out there, even when I think I've nailed it, there's probably a better shot there. And so I like to try and give myself, okay, I think I've put it in the bag, I've got it, I've nailed it or whatever. But I'm going to keep playing around with this a bit more and see what else is here, because you can often surprise yourself. And so you can't really necessarily be an editor while you're there. You're kind of gathering stuff to go home and evaluate later on. But you're doing it with some sort of, you're not just randomly you're not like spraying and praying and hope, you're not doing that. You're being very considerate about everything that you're doing, but all you're aware of is the fact that you've maybe found a great idea here, but maybe with a bit more fine tuning and honing, you might end up with something even better than what you had. And so this idea of just going out there and just coming home with successful pictures, everyone that you've done, that's not the way it is. And I never look at it that way at all.
I was curious because, a lot of your images, I'm correct me if I'm wrong, but all of your photographs are shot on film. Mm-hmm. And so you're doing a lot of the development of those images on your own. Talk a little bit about kind of your thought process or workflow going from capture to print and the final product in terms of knowing the edits that you're going to make. And because a lot of the edits that you make are obvious. I'm guessing, I haven't seen the before and after, but there's been a lot of alterations to the image to get to the final result.
Yeah. No, you wouldn't offend me in the slightest. You could have been much more direct about that if you wanted to, Matt. It's not a problem. For years ago, I remember going to clubs and things like that, and people would ask you, "Do you manipulate?" And you would try and hide behind that.
Right.
And now you're best just telling people, "Yes, of course," because in my view, I think again, you've got to decide what photography is for you, because I think it's an evolving art form. At the moment, it's spilling over into graphic design. It's it's got very loose boundaries. So you can either decide that you're a verbatim person, that what you saw with your eye is what you want to capture. And if that's what you want to do, that's fine. You can also be somebody that if you want to move objects around or blend skies in or transform things and stretch trees, I think that's fine too. And it's not for me to decide anyway. I think, but for each one of us, we all have to decide what our boundaries are, because I think we've got our own kind of parameters of what we're comfortable working in and what we think is acceptable. And for me, I'm very much into this idea of I never try and edit anything with the aim of trying to salvage it or fix it or make it look better. I'm always, everything that you'll see on my website is something that as soon as I put it on the light table, I just went, wow, I love that. But I want to play with it. And to me, that's like an extension. So I personally don't like the phrase post-process because it sounds like an afterthought. And I like to think it's just like a continuation. And oddly enough, I actually think that you'll learn so much from the editing stage that I think that feeds back into my field work. It's not the other way around. I think an awful lot of people seem to think that if they spend more time out in the field, they'll get better at their photographs. But I actually think you get better at photographing from working with images and noticing that I can't separate that tree out from the background, because the tree is the same tone as the background and it's the same colour. But when I was there, they looked like two different things. The background hill looked like the background hill and the tree looked like the tree. And now when I see this 2D, they're all merging together. So one of the things I found during my editing process is I've learned to look for more tonal separation in the field. So when I go out there, I'm actually now particularly drawn to subjects where I know, oh look, that's actually got a very different tone. If I'm working on a white beach or something, if I find like a black rock, that'll excite me more than something that's just a similar tone to everything else on the beach. So I tend to go looking for those things, and that's been informed from the from the editing. So to some degree, you end up building up a little bit of a catalogue of things that you know that work, that if you see them out in the landscape, you can employ them. So there is that, but that also, I'm worried about saying that to you because it sounds like that could lead to some form of contrivance or template or formula. And I'm very much of the belief that when you go out in the field, you don't go looking for things. What you do is you don't know what you're looking for until you find it. It's that kind of thing. You just go out there and you just see what resonates with you and you respond to it. But usually what happens for me is I'm usually getting more excited about the things now that I know will edit well. Because I think, well, actually that rock separates very nicely from the background. And the river doesn't clash into the tree, and everything's got its own space, and it all just fits in very nicely together. There's nothing overly distracting, and you can almost just see it when you're there. But that's come from looking at so many things that didn't quite work when you're editing them,
right?
And similarly, I've got a view about aspect ratios where. Every year I get somebody in my workshop saying I always end up going home and cropping all my pictures to 4:5 on a 3:2 camera. And I often have an argument with, not everyone, but a lot of people. My argument is that if you actually went out into the field with a 4:5 aspect ratio from the very beginning, the compositions would be tighter and cleaner than they would be with going out there with a 3:2 with the intention of cropping to 4:5 when you come home. I think the journey would be much more succinct. I think the focus on what you're doing would be much tighter. And so I think that if you've got a particular predilection towards a certain aspect ratio, try and buy a camera that allows you to work on that aspect ratio. So a lot of the new ones now, like the mirrorless ones, they've actually got like a myriad of different aspect ratios that you can set up on the back of them, and they mirror that in the eyepiece. I think that's very crucially important. So to get back to the process, that's really where it comes from. I'm 100% film. I go out there with a light meter. I tend to like metering everything, spot meter. I like to paint the image in my head how I think it's going to render in terms of the tones. And it's all an approximation because sometimes I'm wrong, and which
right.
is all right. And sometimes you get some nice mistakes. You get some nice mistakes out of it. And then, but yes, I think as your style sort of develops, whatever you you tend to know what you like. And you do tend to have maybe a little bit of a golden handcuffs here in the way that you tend to get drawn to sort of very similar things. I can go to about different countries now and I can probably find similar. I've got this old client friend of mine. He's quite a character. He's got some very funny stories about meeting Ansel Adams, actually. Stephen Feinstein, who's probably about 900 years old now, he came on a workshop with me about 10 years ago, and he's 85 and he's still around, and I still talk to him on email and things. And Stephen said to me the first day I met him, he said, "You seem to go anywhere in the world, Bruce, and create the same photograph." and I get what he's meaning. Maybe he was being rude, but I don't think he was. I think that was a compliment.
Sure.
I'd like to think that what he was telling me was that wherever you go, you make the place yours. And I've had time I write a lot on a blog and things. So one of the things now I think that everybody should be, if you really want to try and find a style in what you do, sometimes it's not about going to photograph a place. You're going to make images that look like you, that you make the landscape your own, so that when people look at them, they go, yeah, that's Matt Payne's version of Yosemite, or that's Bruce Percy's view of Monument Valley or something. I think that's the highest form of compliment I think you can get these days, particularly with something that's really famous and well known. If people can look at the pictures but they know they're yours without being told, I think that's an amazing place to get to. And that maybe we should all be aspiring to. It's certainly what I try and aspire to now, I think. So then I come home and I've processed all the films myself now, because I've given up trying to get labs to do it properly. And I've got this little film scanner, and I don't scan every single image. I just scan the ones that I'm really inspired by, get motivated by, and I go for a walk in Photoshop to see where it'll take me. And so one of my questions to you earlier on was about your editing skills, because one of the things I've been saying to people now is that you don't know where your boundaries are until you go beyond them. So, and I think this is true, that some people, like in general, when you're trying to do an editing class with folk, you tend to find that everybody's pictures, they could be pushed on even further. And yes, okay, there's a matter of style and, personal taste. There's a matter of personal taste that, maybe people don't want to push things that far because it looks too odd or too crazy for them. But in general, what I'll find is that, like, on a scale of, like, if you've got somebody moving a slider from 1 to 10, they'll go up to 3 and they think it looks good. Now, if they go out the room and I move it up to 6 and they come back into the room, sometimes they don't even notice it. So what I do now is I'll say to people, well, actually, right, instead of moving it to where you think it looks good, move it beyond where you think it looks good. So go way up to 10 on it, so it's just utterly crazy, and dial back.
Yeah. Because
sometimes what's happening is that you're so settled into looking at it a certain way that any adjustment on it is just going to cause upset to you. It's just it's too much to handle. And I suffer from it as well. I'll find that my first draft of edits, they're all done in about, say, 10, 20 minutes. And I save them. And then the next day I like to review them first thing in the morning. And usually you look at them going, well, I think that could be pushed further. And then when you look at it a week later, if you look through the layers in Photoshop to see from a chronological point of view, you think, on day one I thought it was finished. And actually now when I look at it, I was only 50% of the way there.
Right.
Because the human perception is a very interesting thing when you get into reading about it. Audio perception, visual perception, and how our perception basically hijacks us and lies to us. So sometimes when we really think that something's bright and luminous enough, it's not. And so one of the ways of getting around that, for example, is to work on a white background in Photoshop or something like that. If you're working on a grey background, it'll give you false impressions that your photograph's bright enough. Things like that. So you've got all these little tricks of the trade to sort of wake your vision up. I don't know if that's answered the question, but that's kind of what I do. And I'm really big on portfolios. I like to spend a lot of time. Sometimes I end up choosing the images I choose to work on aren't necessarily the strongest ones. It might be a case of that very early on in the edit, you you got 4 or 5 images that are so strong as a set that what I'm doing is I'm now actually looking through the rest of everything else I shot to see what will complement that to add to the portfolio. So I'm much more portfolio driven now. I like to think about themes more.
Yeah, I would love to get more into that style of editing. When I first started out in photography, I was doing mountain climbing, and so I would come home from my mountain climbs, and my predilection was to like do a trip report. Like, here are all the photographs I took on this hike and this climb, and like I just never got out of that mindset. Like, I went on a trip, I'm going to edit my photos from that trip. Here are the photos from that trip. But I think editing more on of a thematic basis makes way more sense. You can have much stronger collection of images that complement each other more. I mean, yes, like if you do a trip report, it can tell a story about the experience.
Well, that's great too. I think you are who you are. And I think that every time that you give anybody a bit of advice or suggestions or ideas on a workshop, they're not for everybody. I think my view on it is I usually have a caveat at the beginning. I just say, borrow what you like, take what you like. And if it doesn't make sense to you, if it doesn't make sense, it's not for you. And so now the way you're describing your stories, like you're very, so yes, I think a portfolio could work for you. I just want to also interject there slightly that I also think that portfolios actually are very good at finding out what your style is, if you do have a style. I'd like to think that everybody does to some degree, but sometimes it's just so hidden because there's so many other things in there that are kind of hiding it. And until you start really sorting your work, collating it, putting it together in some sort of sensible fashion, you're not going to know that. And so that's when doing an exhibition is really beneficial. Just this idea of renting a space in a coffee shop and going through the process of choosing 10 images to put up on the wall can be hugely instrumental. Or even like you want to do a book on blurb to send, to bore your family with at Christmas by sending, here's my pictures as a Christmas present, or something. Going through that process, you can learn a lot about what you're doing. I just find it also very enjoyable in the way that somehow it feels like there's just something more to it than just I'm taking images, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to talk to you about composition before we ran out of time. And I know you had said that you don't see yourself necessarily as a minimalist, more in terms of like reductionist, which I think is a very appropriate way of thinking about it. How do you know when you've perhaps oversimplified a composition? Like, what's the magical balance there?
I suppose you probably just feel like you've lost something in the picture. There's some sort of essence that's gone. And that's a very difficult one to answer, actually, because all I would say is you've got to go beyond the point of knowing, again, it's about boundaries. You've got to go beyond the point of thinking, actually, that's just too empty. And I actually felt like I went on a little journey with that over the last 6-7 years, because anybody that did follow me from the very beginning, the pictures were, I would say earlier on, the compositions were quite well thought out, I would say. There were probably still a lot of tonal distractions in there, and things weren't maybe as simple or as clean. And then every time I found new landscapes, like when I went to Bolivia, it got simpler. Then when I went to the interior of Iceland, it got even simpler. And then when I went on my fanboy thing of going to Hokkaido after Michael Kenna kindly gave me his guide's details, and I went to Hokkaido, you kind of get a bit spoilt by working in very minimalist places that you almost can't go back to busy places. You become very, very selective about it. But what happened was I ended up, the most ultimate minimal place was basically in the middle of Iceland in wintertime. The guide I've got, he would get us in there where it's like you're on the ice sheet in Greenland. You're in the middle of nowhere. There's no roads. The roads are 2 meters underneath the snow. The cars are driving on 2 psi. Now, I've had people dispute that with me, and they say, you're making that up. And I'm not. I actually went back to my guide and double checked this. He told me they're 2 psi, and he has to drive very slowly, and the tires are like a snowshoe. And so we're getting into these places where you almost can't even see the mountain. There's just like a black line hanging in space. And I got really attracted to this sort of stuff. And that's the way he described it to me initially. He said, I think there's a place that you would find interesting. It's like a white canvas with black pencil lines on it. And I did about 2-3 years of it. I couldn't get people to come on it. Every year that anybody came on it, it was the same people. So if a newsletter of quite a few thousand people, I would get the same 3 or 4 people sign up every year and nobody else would come to do it. And so that's when I sort of figured out that this isn't for everyone. and certainly for me, I just found that was probably as minimal as I could go, really. But I think I think there's a couple of things as a photographer you've got to get beyond, so that you know that you've gone too far and come back. Reduction, about how many things you leave out of the frame. Registers, tonal registers, like going high key. I think there was like 4 years where it was just, everything was just turning into almost being super high key, and I was pushing that as far as I could, to the point of, I'm personally quite fascinated by things on the edge of perception, when things become invisible, particularly horizons. If you get a shot where the horizon isn't there anymore, it can be quite an interesting optical conundrum for the viewer, because it either causes disharmony in the way that they just don't understand what the picture is, or they do understand what the picture is, but the brain is filling in the gaps for them.
Right.
And I'm personally fascinated by that side of things. That really floats my boat, so to speak. So I kind of got into playing around with that, and also got playing into super bright registers. And I've done about 5 or 6 years of it, and I kept thinking, man, this is going to change. And about 2 years ago, out of the blue, I just started finding there was a lot more colour coming back into the work. When I now just think that I seem to go into certain modes depending where I am. If I'm in Iceland, the Black Deserts, then everything tends to be very monochromatic. If I'm in Bolivia, or I'm in the Puna de Atacama in Argentina, then it's all full-on strong colours, vibrant colours there, and gradations, smooth gradations in the sky and things like that. If I'm on Hokkaido, then it's white canvas time. So I think I'd found that I was actually reintroducing colour and depth of tone back into the work, but I was doing it on a choice basis when I felt that it was appropriate to do so. So my theory is that I think you've got to go through this kind of apprenticeship for 10, 20 years, or maybe for the rest of your life, where you have to play around with working through all the tonal registers. And to me, my analogy would be, it's being like being a singer or a piano player. You don't just play the middle octaves, you start playing the really high octaves, and you play in the really low octaves too. But at the very beginning, I think as a beginner, we just play in everything. We tend to find that the pictures have probably got all super dark tones, super light tones, mid-tones. It's just got everything in there. And then as you become more tuned in to being able to read pictures better, I think to start realizing that was all a bit messy. You've just got everything in, you need to go through a process of simplification. And then you have to go through a process again of where maybe you've gone too far with the simplification and you're just slowly reintroducing things. But like any pendulum swing, going back to where you were, this idea of going back to something, you're never the same. You just don't go back to doing what you did before. I think if you go back to putting more colour in, or more objects into your frame, I think you're doing it with probably a bit more. I would love to think there's more awareness, and because it's all based on all the things you've been learning. So I don't know if that answered the question. I can't remember what the question was.
Yeah, no, totally. It's funny because as the years have gone on, I'm finding myself more and more reluctant to kind of impose my own will on the landscape. I'm more kind of receptive to what it's offering. And
Absolutely.
as you were describing that kind of black chalk pencil on the white snow, I had a really amazing experience back in December where I did a 21-day trip down to Antarctica and Falkland Islands. And on one of our last days, we dropped into Deception Island, and it was snowing. And Deception Island is just this black volcanic rock with lots of hillsides and lines and things like that. But it was like the perfect amount of snow to where you just had these shapes and lines, and everything was super high key. And we're on this moving boat that's slowly traversing around the interior of this island, because it's like a caldera full of ocean water. And so I'm just the whole time photographing these charcoal sketchings of black sand and white snow, and it was just fantastic.
Yeah. So this idea about again, I've written about this in my blog a lot. I think there's what you've tied into a little bit there is pre-visualization, when you talked about having to basically submit to the landscape. And the thing I like to say to people is the landscape doesn't even know that you exist. So how does it know to give you what you want? And I think this is a very interesting. Again, the camera points both ways. The psychology behind it is that anticipation. We can't help but anticipate. It's what we do. And if you are a practicing Buddhist, everybody says it's all about trying to stay in the present moment. Well, it's very difficult to do. So what we tend to do is we either ruminate over the past, or we're always projecting into the future. And similarly, as a landscape photographer, it's very hard to get up in the morning and not anticipate, particularly somewhere that you've seen pictures of. I think that can be hugely detrimental to you to go there, because you've already, you almost want to have amnesia before you go somewhere, because then you'll just take it the way that you see it, your first impressions on it. But that anticipation, I'm pretty much of the opinion that you can't avoid it. It's going to happen. It does have some benefit, but it has some downsides too, in the way that you might preconceive an idea. You want a landscape to be a particular way. You were so looking forward to getting there and having a sunrise shot. And I remember one trip I did in Glencoe in Scotland years ago. We got there to this famous tree that used to be there, and everybody'd seen pictures of it, and they were all anticipating getting shots of that tree. And it was foggy. We couldn't see a thing. And most of the group decided it was a write-off and went straight back to the car. And as a workshop leader, one of your things that you can't help doing is that you end up watching other people's behaviour. You see the limiting factors that everybody's got, their own personal makeup, how they deal with failure, how they deal with things not going their way. And I think one of the first things you have to understand and learn in photography is it's not going to go the way you want it to go. And rather than sort of it submitting to you, you have to submit to it. And if it's not giving you what you want, and more often times when you're saying there's nothing happening today, what you mostly might be saying is, I couldn't see anything because I was already wrapped up in getting a certain thing. So trying to be lateral about it and actually, okay, let's let go of this. Let's just completely let go of anything that I was hoping to get and what is here. So on that trip in Glencoe, Kieran, that was on the trip with me, Kieran had done a lot of workshops with John Paul Caponegro. And I actually thought that JP had taught him a lot, because we got back to the projector room and everybody was rather dissatisfied about the morning. And I'd asked Kieran for this shot that he'd taken, and we stuck it up on the projector, and everybody just went quiet. And they all they said, wow, where was that? And I said, well, it was one of the lakes, the loch, because we don't have lakes in Scotland. Well, we do. We've got one loch. It's called the Lake of Menteith, if you want to know, just to add confusion. But that's the name of it, the Lake of Menteith, even though it's a loch. He'd photographed these rocks in this in water reflections, and it kind of looked like a JP kind of shot. It was a John Paul Caponegro kind of stylistic shot, very abstract. But I thought it was great that he'd seen it, that everybody else they were just so clouded with the idea of getting that traditional shot they'd seen countless of times before. So pre-visualization and all that sort of stuff, they can kind of get in the way a wee bit sometimes. And I think it was Michael Kenna once said that pre-visualization is tantamount to creative constipation. Or it was Ray Metzger that said it. It was one of the others. Because I think it was, I know Michael put me on to Ray Metzger's work, and I really like his work. But anyway, the pre-visual, I think, it's all about learning to let go. And taking a chance with things, not being so precious. It's a very double-edged sword. You've got to be in it, and you've got to be outside of it at the same time. This kind of person that you can go in there and you can be flippant about what you're doing, so that you can experiment and try different things, but also care enough that you're not being destructive with what you're doing, and so then it comes down to the degree of control. And one of my feelings is that I think I'm slightly a control freak about things, and over the years I've had to learn to back off from certain things or just walk away. Like if a composition's not working, rather than just keep nailing at it, and just hammering away at it and hoping that you're going to try and get it right is to, you know what, this isn't working. And what I found that normally if I start walking away from it, I usually find something that's better.
Yeah.
But if you until you walked away, you're not going to find that. So, you know, this is the thing about learning to let go is sometimes the best thing to do. And yeah.
I was just going to say, so much of this is mindset. I feel like a lot of people go into certain locations or certain sub-locations within a place, and they kind of have this preconceived mindset that, okay, at this location, the photograph you're looking for is sand dunes and layers or whatever. And if that's your concept going into it, your mindset, then that's all you're going to look for, and you're going to miss out.
Yeah. So that's your personal makeup, and certainly as a workshop leader, one of the things I often get asked is like, you've had a great day, you've been out, you've shot a lot of things, you're driving into the car park at the end of the day, and you're really pleased, and you're just looking forward to dinner. And sometimes on some of the trips, you'll get somebody in the car saying, "What are we doing tomorrow?" And I actually find most often than not, if I just tell people there's a couple of options, but they're weather dependent, and I'll tell you tomorrow, they all go, "Okay." And so what you find out is that it was more like they weren't really wanting to know what was tomorrow. It's just more like an instinctive thing or a habit to do that. And I have a theory that we all lead ordered lives now, where we've got a calendar and a schedule, and we've got things that we've got to do. And I certainly think that with workshops, you know, usually in truth, normally I've got a couple of things in mind for the next day, but it's just dependent on what's going to happen with the weather. And even then, you know, you might be driving somewhere and you're getting a hunch. You're thinking, I don't think this is going to work today. But you're too far down the line. You've already spent 40 minutes getting there. So you just commit with it. You go with it. You get there and you find out that you've had one of the best mornings ever.
Yep.
You know, so sometimes you've just got to say, okay, this is my decision. That's what I made. And I actually think most people are okay with that. I think they know that something you can't tell if you can't forecast the future. So yes, I think there's an awful lot of personal makeup about, you know, anticipation, about how much you constantly are striving for, or even putting yourself under a lot of pressure, that you've got to find something. Maybe you don't have to find something. Maybe today's just a day where you just go and I actually find if I can't get any conclusion on something, it's just best to sort of back off on it. And then I've been trying to record this video editing class all week, and I'm 4 days into procrastinating about it. and over those 4 days, I found that all that's happened is my idea of what I'm trying to do with it has become clearer. And I think that something was just telling me in the background that I just needed to sort of back off it. You're not really quite ready to put this together yet because you haven't really thought it through. I'm not saying that I'm really great at this or that I've got a natural ability for that or I've learned this over the time. I'm just aware that we all have these feelings in us, all of us. And half the time with our photography, what we're really dealing with is our own stuff.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right. My last question is, who do you recommend that we learn more about here on the podcast? Who inspires you?
Oh, well, that's a difficult one. I don't really spend a lot of time looking at other photographers' work these days. I just seem to be so busy doing what I do. But that's not. It's just because of work stuff. I'm not trying to claim that I've never needed to do that. Very early on, I used to, I was a huge Gail and Rel fan, Ansel Adams, Michael Kenna, obviously. I was a big Michael Kenna fan. A lot of the Nazreli Press photographers. And interestingly enough for me, if a lot of the photographic books I tend to buy, they're not actually landscape ones, they're actually reportage. I actually love street photography. I don't think I'm particularly good at it. But my friend Neil McElwraith, Neil's got an online photographic bookshop called Beyond Words, and he lives about half an hour away from me. And he's run many kind of book launches for very well-known photographers like Martin Parr and stuff like that. And he said to me, there's one thing in common for a lot of these guys is that the books that they buy are nothing close to the kind of pictures they make themselves. And I thought that was really interesting. So for me, I'm a huge Magnum photography agency kind of So all the stuff I like looking at is really quite old. If I look at it, but most of the inspiration I get these days is that it's mostly, I'm a huge music nut, so I go to Iceland for the music festivals there. There's I love a lot of very kind of modern, I don't know how you would describe it, but it's kind of modern classical music. So Olafur Arnalds from Iceland, Nils Fram, who's also an Icelandic composer, Johan Johansson, Max Richter. I like a lot of that stuff. I like a lot of very ambient noise stuff, things. So I get inspiration from a lot of other things, really, but I don't really, unfortunately, it sounds like a bit of a cop-out, and I'm very sorry to not have anybody to really think about. But I can certainly say that there's a couple of very nice people that you should try. My friend Trum Bergsmo from Norway.
Oh yeah, I love his photography a lot.
Yeah. So he's lovely. The book that he's got, he's a super nice man to hang out with. We got flew together in Norway. So I went to visit him. I went to visit him in Norway, and we basically got a lung infection, both of us, and stayed in his house for 10 days bedridden. And that's all that happened when I went to visit Trum. I think Hans Strand is an amazing landscape photographer. I don't know if you've had him on yet. I'm sure you must have, maybe by now.
Yeah, twice.
Okay, right, okay.
Yeah.
We'll go for this thing, and there's somebody else you should talk to or something. But and they're mostly personal recommendations from people that I've maybe had some connection with. But I know Trum quite well. Usually have a catch up with him now and again. But I think he's a nice photographer with what he does, and I think he knows Norway extremely well and things. I think he works with Hans occasionally, or they used to. I don't know if they still do. My friend Rainer in Colorado is worth talking to us, I think, as well. I think he would be. He's a very inspiring guy to talk to. Just basically because his outlook, the way he kind of coordinates his life and everything, the way he thinks about things, I think he's not just a photographer. He's also got his own business with it. He's very big into sort of alternative medicines and things like that. I tend to find that we share a lot of similar conversations when I'm talking to him. So that's what I get inspiration from, is everything all around me, not necessarily photography these days. I think, unfortunately, I'm just too engrossed in what I'm doing. And I probably do suffer from a bit of insularity about it, which I'm not entirely convinced it's a great thing. I keep thinking that it's a bit like styles in some respects, golden handcuffs, that I think if you get a particular style going, it's kind of difficult to break out of it. And being insular can be good in some ways, that I think that you just start to get so wrapped up and involved in what you're doing, you've got no space for anything else. And that probably does lead its way probably to being a bit more individual, perhaps, but I also think that there's a danger that you could just be rattling around doing the same old thing and you're not growing as an artist. Whether you get the inspiration from other photography, from photographers, is not, that could be the one source of inspiration, but it doesn't have to be the only one. For me, I get inspiration from books, something I've read, from music, and a lot of cinematography as well. I love watching lots of films now. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, Bruce, this has been awesome.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me. And you're a nice interviewer as well, because you let me ramble on for ages.
All good. Well, thanks again. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk to me today.
No problem, Matt. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you to Bruce for joining me this week on the podcast. Bruce wanted me to extend some awesome discounts to listeners. Bruce is offering 25% off all of his ebooks on halflightpress.com using the code Matt Payne. This special offer is only available through the month of September, so act fast. That's code Matt Payne for 25% off Bruce's ebooks at halflightpress.com. Before we part ways, I want to thank the latest generous supporters of the podcast on Patreon. These awesome people took the time to head over to patreon.com/fstopandlisten to support the show financially. Since this podcast operates on the value for value premise, where you pay me what you think the content is worth, I highly depend on your support to keep it going. There are no sponsors, there are no ads, and there are no other ways for me to monetize this show. I depend on your donations. If you don't like Patreon, you can also pay by PayPal or Venmo by visiting mattpaynephotography.com/podcast. Thanks to Chris Grieve, Eileen Conregan, and Kelly Reese for your awesome support. And of course, as always, I'd love to hear listeners' thoughts about this week's episode over on Patreon, even free supporters on Patreon. Whenever I release a new episode, it goes to our higher tier Patreon supporters first, often months in advance. On the scheduled public release date, that post on Patreon becomes public, and then anyone, even free members on Patreon, can join in on the conversation. I can't wait to see you there. Cheers. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks for stopping in, collaborating with us, and listening. See you next week.